Game over, man. Game over. Johnny.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
So serious.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the InSession Film Podcast.
Welcome to episode 574 for February 25th, 2024, and I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us, everybody. Really looking forward to this week's episode.
Lots.
We have a lot to get through.
Yeah.
We are ramping up toward the Oscars.
Things are getting big.
On this week's show, Brendan and I are going to go through our top 10 Oscars desserts. That's the conversation.
Oh, I can go for some chocolate cake right now.
Love a good chocolate cake.
Yeah.
No, we actually have some interesting things we need to talk about. First,
Yeah.
before we get into Denis Villeneuve, which will be our main topic of conversation, because he has a little film coming out this week. It is called DUNE Part 2.
I wish that was the official title.
I know, it should be. So DUNE Part 2 coming out. A lot of people have seen it already.
Yeah.
I am getting to see it tomorrow night as we are recording this. So by the time this episode goes live, I will have already seen DUNE Part 2.
No wonder you needed to record tonight. That's a great excuse.
Yeah, so I am thrilled that I get to see it when I do, because I missed the first press screening, which happened last week. And I missed it because my son's flag football team had a game at the same time as the DUNE screening.
Okay.
So I either got to be good daddy and go to the game, or said, you know what, Sam, forget your flag football team. I'm going to see DUNE instead.
Yeah. And I'm sure Brandy wouldn't have appreciated that. She may have turned into a giant sandworm and eaten you up after that one.
Well, that was also part of it as well, because Brandy could not be there because she had a work function. So at least she had a great built-in excuse.
Yeah.
If I just would have left to go see DUNE and left Sam there parentless, I would have been in so much
But even
trouble.
so, like, I'm sure Sam would have loved you there for that type of function. So if you found like a babysitter or something like that, it just wouldn't have been the same from his point of view.
No, he would have been upset, and rightly so.
You're a good dad. You're a good dad.
So I chose what I like to believe is the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And I went to the game, and you know what? I'm glad that I did, because Sam has never played flag football before, or any form of competitive football before.
Interesting.
And again, we're just talking about 8-year-olds, so it's not as if the mechanics and the fundamentals are there yet. Certainly not.
Sure.
However, he has been positioned by his coaches to be quarterback. At least that's one of the positions he's playing. He's switching back and forth between him and another kid.
Right.
And it's their second game this last week, and he throws a touchdown pass.
Good for him. Good for him.
It was very exciting. I, of course, welled up. Proud dad tears.
Yeah, there you go. Good job.
It was really fun. So
nice.
I might have missed DUNE, but I got to see that, and it's
scored a touchdown in some other way.
Now.
Yeah. Nice work. Nice work.
At any rate, that's a long way to say I'm getting to see DUNE now this week. Thankfully, a little bit early. Looking forward to that.
Yeah.
Before we get to Denis, though, real quick, I want to reiterate our announcement from last week, because one thing Brendan and I do is we have VIP bonus content. And if you want access to the bonus content, we now have 3 different ways for you to access this extra bonus content. So you can sign up through Patreon, patreon.com/InSessionFilm. Great way to support us. So if you're already there and you want to help out the show, we would really greatly appreciate your support there. If Patreon isn't your thing, if you're watching us on YouTube, for example, we have YouTube memberships.
Yep.
So for a small fee monthly, you can join us on YouTube, and you will get access to all of our bonus content episodes there as well. Let us show up on our main feed. So if you joined, it'll show up as all of our other videos do.
Yep.
So that's a great way to help us out. Or if you're an avid listener of the show on Apple Podcast, you will have noticed that we have some bonus content coming to our Apple Podcast feed. And you can sign up through a subscription there as well, and you will get access to our bonus content there. So we have 3 different ways to access our bonus content.
How exciting.
Patreon, YouTube membership, Apple Podcast subscriptions. It's very exciting. Anyone that wants to check that out, we really do appreciate that.
And we'll say this once again for those who are already supporting us through either Patreon or one of these other services. We appreciate it, first of all. And also, you don't have to do anything differently. This is all the same bonus content going in 3 different avenues. You can continue to support us in one of those avenues the way you already are. You'll still get the same access you're already getting. Exactly.
And on this last week's VIP bonus content, we talked about Tom Cruise.
We did.
There was a report that came out last week that Tom Cruise wants to work with auteurs again.
Yeah.
He wants to get outside of the spectacle, work with some really interesting filmmakers. We talked about that on our bonus content this last week.
Yeah, quite a bit.
And we, I guess, proposed a few filmmakers that could be interesting for Tom Cruise to work with. It's hilarious because we released that episode and it might have been the same day, like later on in the day or the day after.
Yeah, something like that.
A new report comes out that Tom Cruise's next movie will be with one Alejandro Iñárritu.
Which is not one of the names we threw out there.
No.
That's a very interesting one to work with.
That was surprising. Yeah.
I'm intrigued. Iñárritu's a fascinating filmmaker. I don't always love his films, but he has worked with high-end actors before. I mean, Birdman being probably his most stacked cast ever. But I can certainly see why, if Tom Cruise wants to get back into that game, he's going to pick someone like an Iñárritu, someone that's willing to challenge the form in some ways, whether you like it or not. So this is fascinating. It does make me think, are Tom Cruise and Iñárritu, are they supporters of the InSession Film Podcast and they got early access to that bonus content? I would love to, see the chips on our shoulders get a little bit bigger in thinking so, but that was probably not the case.
No,
but it'd certainly be fun.
It was really funny because it worked out great timing wise for us because we were going to record that bonus content regardless.
Yeah.
Tom Cruise wasn't even on our slate, but earlier in the day, as we were preparing for that bonus content recording, that's when the report came out.
Yeah.
So we, of course, talked about it. And the next day, or maybe 2 days later, either way, regardless of our bonus content, they reported that. And then 2 days later, they announced Tom Cruise is working with Iñárritu. Well, I just love how fast that all evolved. It was really funny.
It's amazing. It's amazing. Yeah. And again, he's a name, Iñárritu specifically. I'm weirdly fascinated to see what he would do with someone like Tom Cruise.
I will say it kind of makes sense because you look at something like the scale of The Revenant, or even Birdman, even though it all takes place within this one building.
Yeah, but there's a craft to that movie.
There's a craft, there's a scope to that movie that does align with Tom Cruise's sensibilities in terms of scope and scale.
Sure.
That I understand why he would be drawn to an Iñárritu in terms of a filmmaking dynamic.
Yeah.
But he's only done those 2 films, English films, right? Birdman and The Revenant.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this would be his 3rd English film.
Well, no, it would be a 4th because of 21 Grams and Babel, right?
And Babel. Yeah. I forgot about Babel.
Yeah. Which is, well, I mean, I guess I could see why that would be confusing to many people because that's kind of part of this unofficial trilogy that started with Amores Perros. So it's easy to assume that maybe they kind of live in the same kind of cultural world. And in some cases, they kind of do. But yeah, they were still English. I actually forgot about that myself. I kind of think of Birdman as like the first transition into that because it is so much about the American art experience, right? The New York.
There was almost 10 years in between those films.
That's true.
right?
Yeah,
Something
that's
like that.
true. Well,
Yeah.
yeah, because Babel was 2006, I think, and then
5 or 6.
Birdman was 2014. So yeah, 8
2014.
years,
Yeah.
almost a decade.
Yeah. And of course, he had Beautiful in between there
Yeah,
as well. So, yeah, I mean, it's easy to lose track of that. But
yeah,
yeah, I mean, and even Bardo, I really like Bardo. Bardo similarly has that Birdman kind of scope to the filmmaking. So
hmm
I do understand why Tom Cruise is interested in
Yeah.
working with him. I know
Yeah.
that Inarritu is a little divisive, but I don't know. I kind of enjoy his pretentious
Well,
filmmaking.
I mean, Tom Cruise is kind of a pretentious guy, so I guess
Yeah.
it kind of makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, look, we've talked so many times before on this show about how cinema is a visual medium.
hmm
It has to be compelling.
Yeah.
What we're seeing there on the screen, the images have to be compelling. As much as
Right.
we adore the characters, the themes of a movie, all that stuff, but if the film is dull and egregious to look at,
hmm
those things won't register as much.
No, not at all.
The film has to be visually compelling as well. And Inarritu, at the very least, I mean, the technical prowess is undeniable. I think the visuals on the screen are immaculate,
Yeah.
incredibly engrossing to watch. Whether his characters and the stories and the themes work, certainly debatable. I've enjoyed them for the most part, but
Yeah, I've never been bored by one of his films.
yeah,
And
visually, there's an allure that I think is great.
yeah, for sure. Even if I don't ever love one of his movies, we need people like Inarritu to make movies the way that he's making them. Because
Yeah.
it's a form challenger. And I don't always like the way he challenges the form, but again, I like that I don't like it. Like I'd rather not see people play it safe, and he definitely doesn't do that.
Yeah, absolutely. He's willing to be somewhat experimental, and
hmm
he's very captivated by his own visions, and he's committed to his convictions. And I like that way more than I don't. I know
Sure.
some obviously very much disagree, but
What's your favorite Inarritu film? Is it The Revenant? Because
um,
I know you like that one quite a bit.
I do like The Revenant. Yeah, probably The Revenant. I don't.
I'm looking at his films now.
Morris Peros is good, but extremely brutal.
That's Amores Perros, admittedly, for me. It's been a while since I've seen it. I might change my tune now that I've gotten older, but that movie always felt kind of like, I really hate using this term because I think it is such a cheap criticism that's thrown at movies that are just inherently bleak. But there are aspects of Amores Perros that does come off as kind of like misery porn to me.
Yeah, that's fair.
Like it's gratuitous just to provoke a response, which I don't always appreciate. Which is why I think of that trilogy, I think my favorite is 21 Grams, actually.
Okay.
And I think because I feel like the character work in that one maybe most warrants the brutality and the bleak places it goes in. It's not my favorite Inarritu film. I think it's just my favorite in that, I guess, unofficial trilogy of sorts. But I don't know. I have to rewatch some of those films. I might go with Birdman at this point. I don't really know.
Yeah, I love Birdman
I enjoy that
as
movie.
well.
Yeah.
I mean, Birdman I think is great, and I really like Bardo, but I'm probably between Birdman and The Revenant. I hate to
Okay.
be that fanboyish about it
Yeah.
because I'm not really an Inarritu fanboy by any means, but I know
Mhm.
those are the two that are most talked about when it comes to Inarritu.
Yeah.
I really do appreciate Peros, and I'm probably a bigger defender of Babel than most. I don't
Mhm.
love that film, but I like it and certainly
Yeah.
admire its convictions.
Sure.
So, I mean, I like him on the whole.
Yeah.
I mean, sue
Yeah.
me, I guess.
I mean,
He makes visually compelling movies.
Yeah. He
And-
tries.
And the
He's an artist.
performances are often fantastic.
Yeah, that's fair.
And all of them, really. I
Yeah.
mean, he's able to render these great extensive casts. I mean, even in Amoros Perros, like there's what 3-4 different stories happening simultaneously, and the central leads in all 3 of those aspects are just phenomenal.
Oh yeah,
Just really, really great. I mean, the cast of Babel. Again, say what you will about the film, but the performances are great. Birdman, excellent. The
Yeah.
Revenant, I will defend Leo. I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, you know what's going to happen, right? If Cruz works with Iñárritu and Cruz finally wins an Oscar, the same narrative is going to be thrown at Cruz as it did DiCaprio that same year.
Same thing.
Yeah.
At any rate, I know Iñárritu is divisive, but I'm looking forward to seeing what that collaboration looks like.
Yeah, me too. I'm curious. I'm genuinely curious.
All right, let's quickly talk about SAG. So the Screen Actors Guild had their awards last night as we are recording this. Do you have any thoughts on the winners for this year's SAG?
I mean, there's not many surprises here, but it does still lead to some questions as to who's going to win Best Actress at the Oscars. I feel like it's still kind of a 2-horse race now. Gladstone and Stone, between the 2 Stones, as many people are saying. I'm not sure where it's going to go, but I think now if you're not betting on Oppenheimer or Robert Downey Jr. at the very least, I don't think you know how to bet. But, you know, I'm still not sure about Cillian Murphy versus Paul Giamatti. That's still kind of a question mark, but it seems to be really... I'm saying that it seems to be leaning more towards Cillian Murphy now that we see SAG under his belt, but I don't know. If anything, it still leads to more questions than answers by still tightening the 2-horse race that is happening here in some of these categories.
Okay, I am a little different from you in the sense that I think Best Actor is locked up.
Do you think it's locked up
Cillian
now?
has
Okay. You
won
think it
that,
has
yes.
it? Okay.
Absolutely. I think for Paul Giamatti to still be in that race, I think he really would have needed to win last night. The holdovers outside of Divine Joy Randolph doesn't really have a whole lot of momentum.
Fair.
And Oppenheimer, as we all know, is going to win a bajillion Oscars. Okay.
Yeah.
So I think it's hard to deny Cillian when it's the picture of the year, it's the director of the year, it's the supporting actor of the year, it's all of these tech categories that it's going to win. Score, it will likely win that as well, among many others.
Yeah.
How do you parcel awarding it all of those things, but not Oppenheimer himself? I just don't see a world where they leave Cillian out. Now, if Paul Giamatti won last night, that to me would be the difference. Because then all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, SAG is willing to forego that thought exercise because they truly believe in Giamatti.
Yeah.
And look, everyone knows I've been a huge champion of Paul Giamatti. I truly believe, take it for what it's worth, I guess, but I truly believe Paul Giamatti gave an equally worthy performance as Cillian Murphy.
Yeah.
I think he deserves to win. At the InSession Film Awards, I did give the win to Paul Giamatti. I think he's that great.
Sure.
In that film. It's a career-defining performance. It's arguably, like when it's all said and done, will that be the performance we go to for Paul Giamatti? Certainly
Maybe
could.
it's certainly one of them. It will certainly be one of them.
The future holds.
Yeah.
I don't want to.
It'll be that and Big Fat Liar.
Yeah. But I think that will be the performance that we look to as the defining performance for Paul Giamatti. I'm glad that he's at least Oscar nominated, and he's clearly been in the race. He's won a few, right? He won Critics' Choice. He won the Golden Globe. So he's not going home awards list this season, and that is exciting on its own terms. Unlike some of these other, like the supporting races, they've been locked.
They're locked. They've been locked for a while. Yeah.
Like no one else has won at all.
No.
And at least Best Actor, Best Actress, it's gone back and forth. Now, Actress, I do agree. That one's a toss-up. I don't know how to parcel that one. I mean, Lily might be ever so slightly the front runner now because of SAG? I don't know. I still think Emma Stone could still very much win that, though. I don't know. That was really fascinating.
If I am still a predicting man, when it comes to the 4 acting categories at the Academy Awards, I do think it's going to mirror SAG. Like, if I had to predict right now, I do think it's going to mirror what we saw last night with SAG. I still wouldn't be surprised if a Paul Giamatti does kind of creep in at the last minute, kind of pulling like a sudden Anthony Hopkins over Chadwick Boseman kind of situation out of nowhere. And that's not to say it's the similar type of competition or even narrative there. It's not, and I know that. But at the same time, we've had surprises like that at the Academy Awards, at the ceremony. And if there is to be one, I don't even know if I would call it a surprise, because because Paul Giamatti has still been part of the narrative. I'm just saying I wouldn't be surprised if he does end up winning, just simply due to the fact that he hasn't really been nominated before at all.
Yeah, I'm really curious. Now, to your point, I looked this up as you were talking there. Now, this was right before last year's. The numbers I'm looking at here were right before last year's awards, so I'd have to look that up separately to see if this changes the numbers at all. But prior to last year, the crossover between SAG and the Oscars in the first 14 years of SAG, they crossed over just twice.
Okay.
For all 4 categories, they crossed over just twice.
Mm-hmm.
And the last 14 years, again, minus last year, I'd have to look that up.
Yeah.
But in the previous 14, they have crossed over for all 4 categories 7 times. So a little bit more.
So that is, when you're talking about 14 years, not including last year, that is since what, 2008, I guess? Something like that?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Like that.
So that's half the time, basically.
Yeah, about half the time.
And you're not talking about just crossover in general. You're talking about all 4 of those categories being 100% in line with SAG and the Academy Awards.
And that's what I wanted to know, because that's how you had opened up your last sentiment there, is thinking, hey, I think this is the 4 SAG winners is what's going to cross over to the Oscars.
So it certainly happens. Certainly happens a lot.
It does.
Now, there's still at least one category for sure where it could break that mold, and that's Best Actress, most likely. Yeah, I still have a hunch it's going to be Lily Gladstone. I do. I think I think the momentum's more in her favor. I'll simply say it's just a hunch at this point. I can only go by hunches. I can spew out stats and facts that might support it, but at this point they kind of mean nothing. It's just going by a hunch right now.
Yeah, and to clarify, at last year's SAG, it was Brendan Fraser, Ke Kwan, Michelle Yeoh, and Jamie Lee Curtis.
Okay.
So,
wow.
Out of the last 15, they've crossed over 8 times. Then.
Okay. So technically now that's over half the time. That's over 50%. Yeah,
so you might be onto something there then.
Yeah.
Well, you know, and look, I mean, obviously with this year, it's not that much of a stretch, really, right? Because
it really isn't. No.
The supporting categories are locked up.
No, half these categories are already going to match up. We know that.
Absolutely. And you and I debated a little bit on Best Actor, but I think Best Actor is locked up as well. This really just comes down to actress.
Certainly more so than actor, yeah.
Absolutely. And you got a 50-50 shot. Will the Academy go with Lily Gladstone, or did they go Emma Stone? Who knows? It wouldn't surprise me if they cross over again this year.
I would
not
laugh.
Surprise me.
I would laugh if someone hands them an envelope that says the winner for Best Actress is Margot Robbie for Barbie.
Look, if there's a surprise in there, that would be incredible.
But she's not even nominated. That's the funny thing.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
That's
I was
the joke
thinking
I'm making.
something like, you know, like what if Sandra Huller, what if the votes are split so much between
the two frontrunners, the two Stones,
Lily Gladstone,
which
and
has
Stone.
that has happened before, right?
Yeah.
Where there are two frontrunners that clearly split and divide the vote, that someone else just comes in and sort of overtakes it. Like that's that's a possibility.
It is a possibility. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, we've had surprises before, so it's hard to say.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that the SAG, like the winners, when we're just talking about the winners, the only element of the night on the film side anyway, that was compelling was actress.
Yeah.
And I'm thrilled for Lily Gladstone for a couple of reasons. One, she's really great. I love this for her. It's very deserving. It's a great performance. And her getting the SAG win, just that on its own terms is exhilarating.
Sure.
When it comes to the race, what that means now is that she's very much in it still. So it is a toss-up between the two, as we noted.
Mm-hmm.
Why that matters is not so much for the race itself, although that's certainly part of it. There's a tension now that is compelling. However, it might be compelling for all of the reasons that I hate. Because now
now there's reason
say
to
the line.
Now there's reason to hate Emma Stone because she might win her second Oscar.
And that's the thing, like because when it comes to the discourse, Lily Gladstone winning means that it's wide open.
Yeah.
Now, to your point, does that mean that the anti-Emma Stone voices, will they be louder now? Or imagine if Emma Stone won and it seems as if Emma Stone is really going to win the Oscar.
Yeah.
I would almost argue the insufferable discourse would be world ending. It would just be nonsense. Like, I feel like it would be worse. It would be catastrophic if Emma Stone won last night, because now those voices would be amplified all the more. There'd be so much bitching and moaning. And so you get all of this anti-Emma Stone slander. And again, the whole turning art into sports thing becomes amplified.
Yeah.
But now that it's a race, I'm hoping that the conversation is less boo and hiss and throw tomatoes, and it's more, hey, pro this person that I love.
It's sad. Yeah. Hopefully it does that, but it's sad that you find yourself needing to support or root for one actress just to tell the people voting and the people watching to shut the heck up. It's unfortunate, because then it's the other end of that spectrum. Can't we just all hold hands and sing Kumbaya that we just love movies?
That'd be nice. I mean, the moral of the story for me, as I talked about quite a bit last week, I think they're both great. I'll be excited no matter who wins. I think you're allowed to like both. You can champion Emma Stone and Lily Gladstone. I think they're both great. They're both equally deserving.
Has this happened on every main show for the past month and a half? That there's always an unofficial segment of turning art into sports in some way?
Because the conversation is always there, and you know that's where this is going to go.
Yeah.
It's
a sad but true fact. Yeah.
I hope that the race being wide open means that the conversation is more championing your champion and less bashing the other person.
Yeah.
But we'll see. We'll see. At any rate, just from a competitive perspective, it's fascinating to see how it's going to play out, because it really could go either way with that category anyway.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
The ceremony itself, did you actually watch it?
I did not. I was not available to.
It's not great. Not great.
Really?
I mean, Netflix is paying, I don't know how much money to do that show live, and it has that Netflix sheen, so it looks awful. And because they can't go to any sort of conventional commercials, there's all this filler that is at times interesting, but mostly it's excruciating.
That's unfortunate.
And
okay, I'm glad I didn't watch it.
There's just a lot of gags that are prolonged. It's just not funny. It was not a good ceremony.
That's unfortunate.
Not great.
It's unfortunate when it's not a good ceremony, because you want good ceremonies to support good things, because then that brings people in to actually have a curiosity about those things, the art specifically. But when the ceremony is not good, it dissuades people, and that's unfortunate.
But the Oscars is almost here, and then we're done.
Yeah, as we're recording this,
done.
2 weeks, I think, as we're recording this. Is that when it is? March 10th?
So very close.
Yep.
Okay. Last week on the show, we did a consensus ranking of the Coen Brothers.
We did.
It was
we
a lot
did.
of fun.
We ranked 18 films. We had to come to an agreement on what you and I collectively think their films would be ranked as.
Absolutely. It was a great discussion. We went back and forth on a few films. It was a little surprising how it played out even at times.
Yeah.
It was a great time. However, we noted in that conversation that on this week's show, we were going to do an addendum. We're going to have a coda to that ranking because off the heels of seeing Ethan Coen's new film, Drive-Away Dolls, which that review is out already. So please go and check that out.
Yep.
Also a surprising conversation, it turns out.
Yeah, the conversation went as long as the movie.
Yeah, which neither of us anticipated. But we had a fun little debate about that movie. So in addition to that, and Joel Coen's The Tragedy of Macbeth, that solo directorial effort, we wanted to include those two films with this ranking. So
yep, and I think it makes sense. Sorry to cut you off, and and as we talked about on that review of Drive-Away Dolls, for those who haven't listened to it yet, given the separate nature of both of those films, Macbeth and Drive-Away Dolls specifically, you can kind of sense the two halves of what makes the Coen Brothers the Coen Brothers. Like they're on two such tonal different extremes that I feel like it kind of makes sense to include them in this consensus ranking as to represent what they are collectively and what they are separately. It's almost like this weird experiment that still showcases them in an interesting way. And I love that. I think it's fascinating.
I agree. So this should be really fun. We're going to add those two to the ranking here. So before we get to that though, Brendan, lay it out for us one more time. What was our ranking from last week?
Yeah, so I'll give my ranking. I'll go backwards from number 18 to number 1. But before we get to Macbeth and Drive-Away Dolls, maybe the first thing we'll do is see if we want to actually change this ranking as it is. If there's anything you feel like we need to update. I'm not saying I think there is. I'll get to that in a second. But the beauty of the Coen Brothers is that you rewatch something instantaneously, you feel differently about it. Like their movies reveal themselves more as time goes on, and there might be something to change here. We'll see. So bottom of the list, we have The Lady Killers at number 18. Above that, Intolerable Cruelty at number 17. At number 16, The Hudsucker Proxy. Number 15, Burn After Reading. Number 14, Miller's Crossing. Number 13, The Man Who Wasn't There. Number 12, Blood Simple. Number 11, The Ballad of Buster Scruggs. At number 10, Raising Arizona. Number 9, Hail Caesar. Number 8, True Grit. Number 7, A Serious Man. Number 6, The Big Lebowski. And the top 5 are Barton Fink at number 5, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou at number 4, No Country for Old Men at number 3, Fargo at number 2, leaving number 1 as Inside Llewyn Davis.
Yes. So that is a pretty solid list. I really like that a lot.
18 films. I'd say the majority of them are kind of great.
Yeah.
with the majority of those greats being like kind of masterpieces.
That's what made the ranking honestly a little difficult because our rankings were so different because the depth of their filmography is insane.
Yeah.
So
you and I don't fanboy often, but the Coen Brothers are ones we will fanboy over. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And you're right that while there were some obvious heavy hitters we were able to put in the top 3 or top 4, and maybe even 2 or 3 we are kind of easy, or 2 or 3 that we were easily able to put in the bottom. The rest in between were like, okay, just throw it at a dartboard, see where it lands. Okay, that makes sense. That's fine.
That's kind of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so now here we are with the 2. I guess to your question, is there anything that you want to change out of that list?
Yeah, there's one.
Okay.
I want to push Miller's Crossing a lot higher on the list.
Okay.
Again, it's because that's when I just rewatched a few, like yesterday, I gave that a rewatch, and it's like, yeah, this movie's actually great.
It's pretty great. I love it as well.
Yeah. But see, like what I said last week on episode 573 was that it's a film I found a little bit plodding. when compared to some of these other films, and it
Mm.
is a movie that's more dedicated to its plot mechanics. There's a lot of there's a lot of double crossing, sometimes triple crossing, sometimes quad crossing happening there, and it's hard to keep up with it because the movie just kind of it feels like it opens at the midpoint of a story you didn't fully see. So there's a lot to really kind of like pull in that you might feel lost for the first 45 minutes or so. But rewatching it again and really kind of watching it through the lens of Gabriel Byrne's performance as Tom, I think he's actually one of the most fascinating Coen Brothers characters, at least from a leading man standpoint. And to really try to get a sense of what his agenda is, I think makes that film so fascinating, so contemplative, and very cynical. It's a very cynical film with a very contemplative and kind of sombering, sad nature to it.
Okay.
And I liked it a lot more. I really did. I don't know if you feel differently. If you feel at number 14 for that film, it's fair. I would like to maybe push it to the top 10 if I'm being honest.
Oh, well, see, this was really tough because where I have it on my own personal rankings, which is outside the top 10, it's not because I don't like that movie.
Yeah.
It's just because, to your point, they have so many
I know.
goddamn amazing movies.
I know.
That's all that it is. Like there's gonna be films outside your top 10 that you really like and adore and maybe even love because their filmography is just that deep.
Okay. Then
So-
maybe the question is where you have it and where I have it on my personal ranking. Do we just simply split the difference? Because I have
Like,
it way
I don't-
higher than where it is now, at least for me personally.
On our collective ranking, I wouldn't go any higher than 11. I would still champion the other 10 films above it. That's where I'm at.
I can live with that. I can live with putting it 11 or 12. I think where I'd have it now is maybe my personal 8 or something like that. I know right now we have Blood Simple above it, but I do think it is a bit more refined than Blood Simple. So at the very least, I would like to put it above that one, and then that would put it at number 12. Can kind of go back and forth.
Simple and Man Who Wasn't There down.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
I'm yeah. I mean, we're splitting hairs between movies that I love, so I mean,
That's why this exercise sucks.
yeah.
Why do
So
we do
that's
this to
fine.
ourselves?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a great question. So yeah,
Yeah.
12 is fine, and then shift the other two down. That's
Yeah, and I do just want to say I would probably put it at my personal number 8 right now. Maybe number 9. I don't know. But it'd be somewhere in that range. I just every Coen Brothers film is going to have this problem though. That's the thing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. Looking at my personal list here, I could probably put it at 12 on my list. I don't know if I'm willing to go higher than that though. And
Okay.
again, it's not because I don't like that film. I do. I love it.
Yeah.
I just love the other films a little bit more. But it's difficult.
Yeah,
Difficult,
it is.
difficult,
It is.
difficult.
Where it might be easier is where we try and place these other two films, these half Coen films. So I guess do you want to transition to that? Because I'm okay with the Coen's ranking, the consensus ranking here that we have now. Now that we've at least taken care of Miller's Crossing. Remember, we talked about wanting to try and rewatch some of these to do this part 2 that we're doing now.
I would move Hudsucker to last place.
No, we're not
I'm
doing
just
that.
kidding.
We're leaving that where it is. I like that movie more than you. But Miller's Crossing was one we talked about where at least I acknowledge that's one I wanted to rewatch to give it a fair, fresh perspective for this. And I now did that, and I think it should be higher.
Okay.
So
Fair
I'm
enough.
okay with this new ranking. So I
Okay.
guess let's go to these next films. I guess we'll start with The Tragedy of Macbeth because that came first.
Yep. Tragedy of Macbeth. I really like the film a lot. It's very good.
I do too.
On this list, I would.
I'm thinking. You want? Well, can I say what I'm thinking, or do you want to go ahead?
No,
if you
go,
have
go ahead. What are you thinking?
I was thinking number 14.
14.
Yeah.
Oh man. I was thinking between Miller's Crossing and Blood Simple.
That I'm okay with. That I can do. That I can do. I was mostly giving the edge to Blood Simple in that regard because it was simply the first. But I will admit that there have been more, for me at least, there have been more refinements in their filmography when compared to something like Blood Simple. And the tragedy of Macbeth is just so damn good to look at that I can see that movie getting a slight edge. So if we put that at number 13 on this collective ranking right now, I'm okay with that.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's fair.
Okay.
Yeah, 13 I think works.
Okay.
Yeah,
that was easy.
I was trying to think, like, as much as I like it, could I go any? I don't know if I can.
Well, here's the other thing too. It's like like, even though I really like the film as well, if I were to think the movie was this absolute masterpiece, would I feel good about ranking it much higher on a Coen Brothers ranking list? Like I feel like it's not quite in the same ethos as some of these others, even though it is half a Coen. It just gets into this weird conversational piece as to
Well,
like let's say, hypothetically speaking, Joel Coen went on his own and made what is arguably the best movie out of all of these 19. How would we feel putting that at number 1 if that were the case?
well, in that case, I don't know what we're doing here then. I mean,
I think there's just a lot of factors to consider here. I guess I'm bringing it up in a very like unofficial way that we don't even need to get into.
If that's how you felt, I mean, we didn't have to do this. I mean, because I agree. I think that's a valid point to bring up. I guess what I'm saying is, in that scenario, if it was a full-on masterpiece and as good as Inside Llewyn Davis, if we decided to do this exercise, then yes, I would put it at number 1.
Yeah, I think it's
that's
like
the whole point of what we're doing here.
Well, I think there's more to just that point. I think it's great to rank these movies within here because of the experimental nature and how they branched off and did their own thing, so we can see what they could do as their own thing. It's like me saying, okay, my 2 favorite Spielberg films are E.T. and AI. AI is my favorite, but I can't rank it above E.T. because that film feels more solely Spielbergian. You know what I mean? It's kind of like a similar kind of thing here in some ways. But I still think it should be included. It falls into a similar conversational piece in that way for me.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't feel as strongly about that.
Okay.
It's a Coen movie, so I mean, if I guess I'm a little apathetic when it comes to that discussion.
Okay, fair enough.
I mean, if do it or don't, I don't really care. Honestly.
I just wanted to bring up the point. I
don't have a strong feeling one way or another.
Yeah.
However you want to do this exercise, if you want to include these 2 films or not, totally up to you.
Yeah.
Like, I don't care one way or another, I guess is what I'm saying. Like, personally, I don't have a strong feeling about it. But for those listening, again, the broader you, if you do have a strong feeling one way or another, then that's great. I mean,
well, I want to bring that up because I know some people might have those feelings, and it's like I want to be able to speak to both perspectives in some way. And I think it's a question that I think is interesting to ponder on, which is simply the reason why I brought it up. That's it.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah,
totally fair.
But I'm happy where we have it ranked here. It's and to be honest, like for me, it's not really because it's only half a Coen movie. It's honestly because I think that's where it should be, just as a movie.
I mean, I obviously did not come at it from that perspective. I just was looking at it on its own terms.
I was bringing up a what if scenario here because I think it is a fascinating what if. Like, what if Joel went on his own and made a movie where it made us think, oh, they shouldn't work together anymore. It's like
there was some of that conversation when Macbeth came out. A lot
of people really like that movie a lot. Yeah.
You know, it's highly regarded. It was on a bunch of top 10 lists the year that it came out. I can't remember exactly where I had it. It might be in my top 20 somewhere. I'm trying to
I think I had it in
recall.
my top. I think I had it like in the box, like the number 16 through 20 range or something like that. I
Something
don't
like
remember.
that, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd have to look up my list. I'm not entirely sure. I thought I could pull it up quicker than that. I can't, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's a movie I really like. I do like it quite a bit. And coming into this, yeah, if I felt like it was a masterpiece and would be in the top 5, I would have fought for that.
Yeah.
But like on my own personal ranking, if I was going to include these two films, which I probably will because they're Coen movies.
Yeah, and I think they
would
work
probably have this
together.
around, 11 or 12, something like
Yeah,
that.
I think I'd have it at 14. It's and the inclusion of both of them do kind of weirdly work together as this Coen Brothers side tangent. Yet they still
Yeah.
fit the narrative of their filmography in a weird way.
For sure. For sure.
So yeah. So okay. So I guess we're happy putting that at number 13 on our collective ranking, which then leaves Drive-Away Dolls. And I think this one might be harder to place for us given our feelings on the movie. I feel like it's going in the bottom 5 in some way. We just don't know where.
So this isn't all that difficult for me.
Okay.
And maybe this is a little bit ironic because, again, looking at my rankings here, my personal rankings, if I followed your footsteps and put this at 14 or 15, for example, and I had Miller's Crossing, Buster Scruggs, Who Wasn't There, Hail Caesar, like all those films above it, the next film would probably be Drive-Away Dolls. I would likely have these two films back to back, hilariously so.
Really?
Yeah, I think I would. Now, again, like
Interesting.
I haven't done this exercise yet. This is the first time I've talked about it or thought about it in any significant way. I wanted to see how it played out here on the show.
Sure.
So, again, looking at my rankings, again, it's in that 12 to 15 range. What I
In
can
your
say
ranking.
for Macbeth.
Oh, for
to be
Macbeth.
clear.
Oh, okay.
So if Macbeth is in that 12 to 15 range, what I can say definitively is that Drive-Away Dolls is above those bottom 4. It definitively, it's above Hudsucker, Ladies Killers, and Intolerable Cruelty and Burn After Reading. I'd have it right there.
Okay. So then I was right in saying that we would agree it goes somewhere in the bottom 5. You would just have it as the number 1 of that bottom 5.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. I guess I can. I mean, our ranking is so skewed right now compared to how I feel about these films because I don't like Burn After Reading, and yet I like the Hudsucker Proxy way more than you. But at the same time, I'm okay putting it at number 16 then for the purposes of this list, Drive-Away Dolls, because of the conversation that it raises. I think it actually raises a more interesting conversation than many of those other films below it, even if I think a movie like The Hudsucker Proxy is better. And I think for those reasons, it makes the movie at least compelling in its sheer existence as it is.
Fair enough.
And sometimes that can give a movie some power. And honestly,
sure.
given like the romantic pathos of Drive-Away Dolls and what we talked about a lot during that review and how it was almost like this form of catharsis for Ethan Coen and his wife Trisha Cook to kind of demonstrate the lack of labeling in their marriage and given their history right now, I think it makes the movie kind of interesting. And I think that does give it a little bit of weight.
I agree. I really like that a lot as well. I know that that's a film that they've been trying to make for a long time. And there's something about the looseness of it that's really fun.
Yeah.
I love its slick subversions, and it's just so very different than any of the comedies on their together filmography that makes it unique. So I very much prefer it. Although, as I noted in our review of Drive-Away Dolls, I haven't seen Burn After Reading in some time. A rewatch of that could change how I feel about those two in terms of my preference to them.
Yeah.
But as it stands now, Drive-Away Dolls is, as I noted, my favorite of that bottom 5 for sure. And I think there's just this, maybe it's because it's so new and fresh that I responded to its Coenisms and its slickness, and
Sure.
I love how it channels an energy that we're familiar with, but
kind of not. It's
like it
weird
puts it
middle
through
ground
this
of sorts.
new cipher that we just haven't seen before with them.
Sure, that's fair.
And of course it speaks to Ethan and his wife's own relationship as well, that I think is really unique. So
Yeah.
I would put it above those bottom 4 for sure.
I'm just happy that it's above Burn After Reading, and I can live with that.
Okay, fair enough.
I don't get cynical often, but I really don't care for that film, Burn After Reading. I've tried many times, and I can't get I can't get it. I just can't get it, and I'm sad about that. I really am, because I like the ideas of that film. I can't grab it. I can't grab it.
Yeah, that's interesting. Very, very interesting.
Yeah. I guess it
Okay,
makes
so
me
that's
sad.
where we're at as far as our updated Coen rankings go.
Which we'll update again in 1 week.
Yeah. So just to be clear, do you want to go through all 20 now that we have added 2 more here?
All right, yeah.
20 where we're at, our final Coen ranking.
Yep, from bottom to top, we've got The Lady Killers, Intolerable Cruelty, The Hudsucker Proxy, Burn After Reading, Drive Away Dolls, The Man Who Wasn't There, Blood Simple, The Tragedy of Macbeth, Miller's Crossing, The Ballad of the Buster Scruggs. That's number 11 through 20 there. Now we get to the top 10. Number 10, Raising Arizona. Number 9, Hail Caesar. Number 8, True Grit. A Serious Man at number 7. Big Lebowski at number 6. Barton Fink at number 5. Oh Brother, Where Art Thou at number 4. No Country for Old Men at number 3. Fargo at number 2. And number 1, Inside Llewyn Davis.
Yeah, that's a pretty good ranking. I'm very happy with that, all
I'll
things considered.
I'll change it in a week. I guarantee I will.
That's the brilliance of the Coens. They force you to change your mind.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now I'm just wondering what's going to happen when they do this horror film together, when they finally reunite. We got to do this exercise again.
It'll be a constant updating of the Coens.
Their filmography is a constant refresh. It really is.
It is.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Hey, everybody, let's talk about coffee.
I need it now. I'm falling asleep here, JD. I need help.
No, we need some coffee in our lives. That's why we love Coffee Cult, because they source specialty grade coffee from all over the world.
That'll help. Does it
It's
taste
incredible.
good? That's what I ask.
Yes. It's got to taste good, because a lot of coffee companies intentionally sell you not great coffee. You know why?
Yeah, that's true.
Because ultimately they are milk and sugar companies.
Oh,
That's what they
gosh.
are.
That's not even appetizing for me.
They
It
want
just sounds
you
sounds
to
gross.
drown out the taste of their coffee with other things. And that's not what great coffee is supposed to be on
No,
its own
it's
terms.
not caffeinated dairy. That's not what it is.
Exactly. Specialty grade coffee should be able to stand out on its own. Whether you're talking about a coffee that has these rich notes of nuts and chocolate, and these really well balanced flavors, or you can get coffees that I prefer, which is basically like fruit cakes as a coffee.
Wow. That's how you describe a coffee. Yeah. Now, I know I facetiously asked you, does it taste good? I know it tastes good. I've had it before. The bourbon barrel flavor one is one of my go-tos. Oh, I love it. I absolutely love it.
That's a great one as well. I love the Ethiopian Harar because it genuinely tastes like you're drinking strawberries and peach and blueberries. Like it's natural.
That's the thing.
Incredible.
It's not artificial.
And that's why you don't want to drown it out with milk and sugar, because those natural flavors are strong. They're potent on their own.
Yeah.
And it adds incredible flavor to the coffee. So that's what you want out of a great coffee. That's why we love Coffee Cup, because those are the kind of coffees they source. Those are the coffees they roast. It's fantastic stuff. So you want to go check it out. Go to coffeecult.com. That's coffee with a K, cult with a K. Coffeecult.com. Use our code and you'll get 15% off. That code is ISF. And you'll get 15% off. So again, coffeecult.com. Get 15% off with our code ISF. and we thank them for their support. All right, let's talk about InSession Film VIP.
That sounds important. I want to know how to
Sounds
get a part of it. Yeah.
because
Yeah.
you all are the best.
Yeah.
And if you want to become an InSession Film VIP, there are a couple of ways to do this. We talked about this last week. We reiterated it up at the top of the show as well.
Mm-hmm.
But if you want to check out our bonus content, if you want to help support the show,
Mm-hmm.
there are a couple of ways to do that. One, patreon.com/InSessionFilm. So if you're familiar with Patreon, I'm sure many of you are.
Yeah.
You can sign up there on Patreon. There are a couple of tiers that have their own rewards to them. But the main one is that you'll get access to all of our extra bonus content that we do each week.
Yep.
So you want to check that out. And additionally to that, we have YouTube memberships.
Yep.
So if you're watching on YouTube, just join our channel. It's a low monthly fee, and you'll get access to all of our normal content and our InSession Film VIP bonus content as well. It's very easy, low monthly fee. You get awesome emojis and badges as well, which is really great.
Those are so
You
clever.
want to check that out. It's really fun.
Yeah.
Or if you're just listening to the show on Apple Podcast, we have Apple Podcast subscriptions, which you'll see on your phone when you scroll through our feed on Apple Podcasts. You'll see right there, there's a banner that says sign up for Apple Podcast subscriptions.
Yeah.
Again, low monthly fee, and you'll get access to all of our bonus content there. And there is a 2-week free trial for Apple Podcasts, so check it out.
Yeah.
2
Check it out.
weeks.
See if you like our additional content. Hopefully you do.
Exactly. So it's a great way to help support the show while getting access to our VIP bonus content.
Yep.
And we really love doing this for you guys. So if you are a VIP and you want us to talk about anything specific, please reach out. Let us know.
Yeah.
What you'd want us to talk about. We'll add that to the list. So
Yeah.
we
Because
really
sometimes
do-
we run out of content, and sometimes JD's just here talking about books that he's reading, which is not really film related. So sometimes we'll need some
there's that
suggestions
as
from
well.
y'all.
Yeah. We'll talk about anything you guys want to talk about. So yeah, please reach out to us there. But yeah, it's a great way to help support the show. We do love doing this for you guys, and we thank you for your support. All right, let's talk about Denis Villeneuve, who is a filmmaker that came onto the scene in a significant way in 2013 with Prisoners.
Yeah.
Although it's fair to point out, as some had to do on social media this last week, because apparently there is an avid Denis Villeneuve fan base who doesn't realize that he made films before 2013, which he's done, and which I'm sure we'll talk about.
We will. Yeah.
Pretty good.
Yeah. We'll talk about
But
him.
we'll talk about them. So yeah, he came onto the scene in a big way in 2013. And he's a filmmaker that in some ways I hold close to my chest because he's grown as we have. You know, he came on the scene the same year we did. And
That's
so it's
true.
been interesting to follow his career and the trajectory of it as we've grown over the last 11 years as well. So
Sure.
he's someone that I've always thought of fondly in that regard. And it's also just been interesting to see, you know, his movies and how distinct they've become.
It's interesting to see how big he has been getting, how big his movies literally have been getting. But it's so often we see filmmakers with a distinct style that go big and they kind of lose that style a bit when they play the studio system. Yet Denis Villeneuve has been trusted to make movies his own. Like when he makes a sequel to Blade Runner with Blade Runner 2049, it still very much feels like a Denis Villeneuve film. And that doesn't happen all that often, especially when it comes to corporate content being what it is. When people are being hired as directors for hire, he isn't. He has always given this, I guess you can call it a blank check in some ways, because even when he's making Dune, he's making his own movies. And I have so much respect for someone that could somehow be able to do that. It's a luxury. He is so privileged when it comes to other filmmakers who are playing a similar game. And I like a lot of his films, and I think he's done a great job in maintaining his ethos.
I agree. I've loved him as a filmmaker. It's interesting how I'm not comparing the two in terms of their prowess, just their trajectories and the style of filmmaking that they are, but it's hard not to compare him to Nolan in the sense of you look at something like Memento and Prisoners, these dramas that are smaller and grounded, but unique to their own ethos as you're talking about, and how they've grown into having the budgets they do to make these grand spectacles, whether it be an Interstellar or an Oppenheimer or an Arrival and now Dune. They're making these big movies that feel lived in, that aren't reliant on this crappy Marvel-esque CGI. Although there's certainly CG in both of their movies,
There's artistry there.
There's
That's
artistry behind it. It's huge, large, epic scale filmmaking that you just don't see very much anymore. In fact,
they're doing things with the form that surprise us. Every time we see something, it's like, I've never seen something like that before. Visually, just never seen that before.
And I agree. And that's what makes Denis Villeneuve exciting to me.
Yeah.
I again, I'm not saying that he's as great as Christopher Nolan, but I do like him for a lot of the same reasons. It is the artistry, it's the spectacle, but there's a craft, there's a pathos to his movies that are really great. He often gets these incredible performances as well, that I think are thoughtful and moving and full of incredible texture and nuance. So I do like both filmmakers for a lot of the same reasons.
That's as far as my comparisons between them will go, but I do agree with those comparisons, is that it's really more about the high-level approach to the way they make their films, the almost mathematical way that they go about it, the precision there, because tonally and emotionally, they are very different filmmakers. They carried very different vibes. And I know a lot of people do compare the two, but I don't want to go down a dangerous rabbit hole in saying that they're similar filmmakers, because they kind of are, but they also aren't. Like they carry their own distinct styles, but in a very superficial way. You're right. The trajectory of them as artists and how they transition to the way that they make movies nowadays is pretty comparable. Like the journeys are pretty comparable, and what they're able to do to surprise us visually and aesthetically, it's not the same kind of surprises or the same kind of aesthetics, but it's a similar kind of wow factor. Right.
Yeah.
It's a similar kind of response that they're able to generate out of us.
I agree. In the spirit of turning art into sports, if we look at something like college football, for example, Michigan and Washington play the same sport.
Yeah.
They're at the same level, doing a lot of the same things, but they couldn't have been two totally different teams more.
Some are more offensive, some are more offense loaded, some are more defense loaded.
Yeah,
So
like
different
Michigan
plays,
was very
different
defense. They ran the ball. Washington was high flying, gunslinging, score a bunch of points. So despite playing in the same game, so to speak, they had two very different styles.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. I very much agree with you that once you look beyond the scope of Nolan and Villeneuve and how they treat artistry at this high budget level of filmmaking, tonally, emotionally, and even thematically to some degree, that's where you do see the two separate quite
absolutely.
a bit, and
I'm
that's
with you.
why it's not an apples to apples comparison, not wholly anyway.
Yeah. And I'm glad we're getting this specific side of the conversation out of the way, because I don't want it to get into like, I know some people are having conversations about, oh, I like Nolan more than Denis Villeneuve. I think he's a better filmmaker. It's like, that's not the conversation we should be having. They have similar journeys as filmmakers, but the point of this is to not say we like one more than the other. I mean, because we obviously might.
Don't
I mean,
care
I might have a
that
preference
conversation.
between the two, but that's not the point of this conversation.
Yeah, I agree. Do you want to start with his Prisoners career?
Yeah,
Because
let's start.
again, a lot of people do forget that he made movies before 2013.
Let's start there. And admittedly, I will say, and I'm not sure if it's the case for you, I do have one blind spot in his filmography, and it is one of these
Maelstrom
early.
is the one for me.
Oh, I've seen that one. The one I haven't seen is August 32nd on Earth.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I guess
so
I haven't seen that one either.
Yeah, so there's Maelstrom and August 32nd on Earth, which I haven't seen. But Maelstrom I did see, and I don't care for it. It's a film I don't love. It's very ambitious. It's kind of a silly film in execution, but I think it takes itself too seriously given its framing device. It's a
Okay.
film that features. It's an actress I love in that movie. She was in The Diving Bell and the Butterfly, which is one of my all-time favorite films.
Oh, yeah.
Marie Jose Crocet, I believe her name is. I think I butchered that pronunciation completely, but hopefully you know who I'm talking about. I think she's really good in the movie. She plays a young model of sorts whose life basically spirals out of control, not just financially and emotionally, but she has a hit and run with someone. And this person apparently is killed and she just drives away, and then I guess develops a romantic relationship with that person's son or something like that. So it's a very interesting conundrum. The movie is narrated by a literal dying fish. I'm not joking.
I have heard that. I do know that. Yeah.
It's a fish at a fish at a butcher shop, literally being chopped in half, telling this tale to us. Like it's almost Amelie.
Maybe I have seen this film because that sounds weirdly familiar.
Like it honestly, like
I'm
those
having
sequences,
deja vu now.
those sequences, and they're very bloody and kind of gross and almost green and brownish. Like they kind of have this like Jean-Pierre Jeunet kind of feel to it. Like it reminds me of Amelie and Delicatessen in a way. And then all of a sudden we're segueing into the story this fish is actually telling, and it's so self-serious. Like if the movie was some sort of comedy, I think I could defend it more, but I think it has pretty big tonal problems that are usually pretty evident with first-time filmmakers. And I think that's the case here.
Okay. Well, I haven't seen that one, so I can't really comment on it. At least I don't think that I've seen it anyway.
It's interesting you say that portion sounded familiar to you. It's hard to forget that, though.
Yeah. But who knows? Maybe I'm having some weird deja vu. I don't know. I don't think that I've seen it. I do know that I've seen Polytechnic now that came out 2009, 10, something around those lines.
Yes. I've only there are two versions of that film, right? One in English and one in French, I think.
I don't recall which one I've seen. Probably the French version, I think.
I think that's what I've seen as well.
I think it was the French version.
Okay.
I don't really remember. I do know I've seen the film though.
Yeah. I like this film.
I do as well. I think it's quite good.
Yeah. I think it's effective. It's brutal, it's devastating, and it focuses
bleak. Yes.
Well, one of the things I like about the movie is something that many people don't like about the movie nowadays, and I'm gonna be careful with how I phrase this because it's not meant to be a defense for movies like this or even movies that approach subject matter like this. But for a movie to have this kind of subject matter of a misogynist killing women specifically, and to have it focus a lot from his perspective, I think is a very daring and bold notion. Again, I don't always agree with that idea, but sometimes you kind of have to be a bit pushy with that sort of subject matter to get a different point of view. And I think the film does an interesting job introducing that point of view without making us sympathize with this individual. And I think it's challenging in the right ways to stir a conversation, a socio-political conversation around that.
No, I agree. It's a little bit of the Zone of Interest before the Zone of Interest came out 20 years later.
Kind of.
It's a little bit of that.
That's not a bad comparison at all.
I mean, because it tries to, in a very stoic and careful way, and to your point, very much like you see in the Zone of Interest, that's a film that's not trying to get you to empathize with Nazis. Villeneuve is not trying to get you to empathize with this guy as much as we stoically and pragmatically follow him, and you come to realize why he's doing what he's doing, and then you see it unfold in this really bleak and brutal way. And how it similarly depicts this evil, maybe not in a banal way like you see in the Zone of Interest, but certainly in this way that's hard to wrap your mind around still.
I'm with you.
Extremely effective as a result.
I agree, and I think there are sequences in this movie I won't forget, and not just because they're bleak and gruesome. It's the way it tries to utilize those sequences to tell something bigger and more necessary. Like it's the overarching message of the movie, I guess, is the best way to put it. That just leaves you with this kind of sting that's hard to shake. And I do think the film does a good job maintaining it. I actually think this is one of Denis' better films. I really like
It's
this
quite
one
great.
quite a bit.
No, I agree. And even like, I know this is just his, third film.
Yeah.
But there's, and again, the way that I haven't seen the previous two, as I noted, but from what I've been able to gather reading reviews and essays about this film, there is a huge jump in terms of his craft and the way he uses the camera, because the way he uses the camera here is extremely effective at times. It's really distinct, and I think does a great job of capturing this event in a way that's not just something that you can see on the screen and be moved by, but it's how he's able to tap into the mind of the killer and also artistically kind of render the heartache of everything that's unfolding in this incredibly symbolic way without any of that like overtaking the emotions that you feel.
I'm with you. It's handled well. It doesn't utilize its bleakness for the sake of bleakness, which is, for a subject matter like this, it's easy to fall into that trap. I don't think it does. I actually think it's pretty sophisticated in that regard.
I agree.
Yeah.
So that's Polytechnique.
Yeah.
And that comes out in 2009, I believe, right?
I believe that's right. Yep.
Okay, so then following that, you get to Incendies, which I would say is the film before Prisoners that people might know of the most, and is arguably his best pre-Prisoners. I love Polytechnique, but Incendies is freaking incredible.
I'm liking this one less as time goes on, if I'm being honest. And this is one that I was blown away by when I first saw. And it's the filmmaking, it's the craft. This is really where you kind of see the familiarity in Denis' filmmaking, even nowadays. I feel like it most starts here and translates to his later films. You can definitely see the blueprint of it here. I think part of the reason why I'm softening on it is because I've seen the film twice, and the thing I always most remember are those moments of bleakness and that twist ending that it gives you. And it does make me wonder if, unlike Polytechnique, which does, it utilizes that bleakness to a positive effect, it doesn't fall into those trappings. I kind of wonder if Incendies does sometimes fall into those trappings. And again, I'd have to rewatch the film again to know for sure. But the fact that the stuff I remember most are those things does make me worry about that. And now I say this as someone that still really likes the movie overall. I do think it's very good and very effective, primarily because of its lead performance and a lot of the filmmaking aspects from Denis. But if I were to rank his films now, I actually have Polytechnique above it. Like there are elements of that movie I prefer, and I prefer the minimalism of that one a little bit more.
Okay, no, that's very fair. I do love the sophistication of Incendies. I love the storytelling. It reminds me a lot. Again, I know I'm getting bogged down in a comparison I shouldn't have. However, since we brought up Nolan earlier, the two films are very different, but it did kind of remind me a little bit of Memento in terms of how you have a mystery that is funneled in a very specific way, and then the revelations come and there's this momentous like epiphany that you have when they come. I feel like I responded to Incendies in the same way as something like Memento. Although obviously Incendies is much bleaker. It's brutal, but I think extremely powerful, with two incredible performances at the center of it all. That's really, really terrific. The music in the film is really great. the way he utilizes the landscapes, the cinematography is
It's a great
out of
looking
bounds.
movie. Yeah.
It's a great looking movie, and I love the sophistication of the storytelling. I do agree it's a precursor to something like Arrival that would come a few years later,
Sure.
but the blueprint I think is handled extremely well in something like Incendies. I think it's great. I think it's easily one of his best films, even still.
Yeah, it's sort of in my ranking right now. It's kind of in the middle. But one thing I do really like about the film is it's of all things, its use of soundtrack, and this is just the music nerd side of me coming out because it utilizes songs, at least 2 songs, if I'm not mistaken, from one of my favorite Radiohead albums, Amnesiac, which is sort of seen as one of their, I don't want to say lesser, but it's not regarded as one of their best, but it's one of my personal favorites. So to see him go a bit deeper with some of those cuts, I just weirdly appreciated.
Okay.
So again, that just speaks to the selfish side of me in some ways, but I do think it's a good tone setter. Like the opening song utilizing "You and Whose Army" from Radiohead, I think is a great tone setter. And yeah, there are a lot of things about on Sundays I do really like, and I need to give the film a revisit to know if some of my reservations would stand in a more fresh, with a more fresh lens. But I'm not sure if I'm there yet. There are things about his other films I've begun to prefer as I've gotten older. But I still think it's a very good film. I think it's such a well-made film, and I love seeing those visual components of Denis Villeneuve in a movie like this that was also nominated for Best Foreign Language Film. Carry over into some of his more commercial films because you don't see that very often.
Okay, that's really interesting. I feel like I'm the opposite. I've been finding this film more invigorating as time goes on. And maybe it's because I hate to say it this superficially, but this was the blueprint for him in many ways that he's regurgitated later on in ways that are incredible because the scale and scope of everything that comes after this widens by 1,000.
It does, yeah.
It's not an apples to apples comparison at all, but there's something about the smallness of this film in terms of scope and scale. Yeah, it's as loud, it's as lavish, it's as beautiful, it's as powerful, it's as sophisticated as anything that he's done in his entire career. As much as I love a Sicario, a Blade Runner, a Dune even, I don't know if those films, while they're much bigger, I think there's an argument to be made that Incendies has more to offer in terms of all of that nuance that I think is great. So this is the film that's been strengthening for me as time goes on. And look, I love all of those movies that we just mentioned, but yeah, there's something about him at his strongest, at his roots here, that makes Incendies just extremely moving.
Where do you
really great?
Without giving away some other movies that could be above it, where do you have this ranked on your personal Denis Villeneuve ranking?
I haven't really wrestled with a Denis ranking, to be honest.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it'll be something that I do later this week after we have this conversation. But
and when we have Dune Part 2 to add to that too,
and have a Dune Part 2 to add to it.
Oh, because and as we'll talk about when we get to Dune, that first part specifically, there's a lot that could change with this ranking when you have a literal Part 2 that could recontextualize how you feel about that Part 1, and that's going to change things.
Right now, just off the cuff. I would have this maybe number 3, worst case 4.
Okay.
But that's where I'd be right now.
Yeah, I think I have it around 6 right now.
I would obviously Arrival is number 1 for me.
Okay.
I would have Blade Runner at number 2, and then either Incendies or some order of Incendies and Sicario would follow.
Okay, gotcha.
That's where I'm at. Now, I love Dune. I rewatched that last week, I believe it was, as I put on Twitter afterwards. I think the film absolutely rules. I do love it.
It's such a great scope. Yeah,
it's very clearly a part 1. So a little bit of what you're saying there could recontextualize it.
Yeah, it's kind of a placeholder right now.
Yeah, exactly. I kind of want to see how it all plays out.
Same.
And give it some time to marinate a little bit.
Yeah. I'm with you. I'm with you. Dune I have ranked here, but it's really just a provisional one because of how that experience made me feel, knowing that there's so much more to come, that this really was kind of an introductory thing. And whatever happens in part 2 would probably make it even better, or some other version of that. So yeah, there's a lot that could happen there. But yeah, Incendies I do have around number 6, and you mentioned a few other films there. I don't know if we want to go too out of order in like I guess like filmography.
We don't
I mean,
have to go in order. I just wanted to start with the pre-Prisoners work.
Yeah.
Because it was quite funny how
Mhm.
there was conversation on Twitter over the last week about how like a lot of Denis Villeneuve fans talk about his work from Prisoners onward as if his pre-Prisoners work doesn't exist. And not only does it exist, as we talked about, Polytechnique is really great. Incendies, I think, is truly one of his best films still. So there's some fun irony there. I
agree.
I love Denis Villeneuve. I would probably champion him a lot more than some critics out there. But I'm not just a pro Sicario, Arrival, Blade Runner, Dune guy. Like I think Incendies is truly masterful. It's really great and one of the best films of 2010 or whenever it came out. So
So my top 3 Denis Villeneuve films right now in order. Number 1 is Sicario. That's my favorite. Number 2 is Arrival. Number 3 is Enemy.
Okay, that's probably 5 for me.
Okay.
5 or 6. Again, depending on how Dune ultimately sits.
Yeah.
For me. But I love Enemy for all of its weirdness.
Yeah. I weirdly love seeing the well, not even weirdly, it's just I love seeing Denis' style tailored to something that is so deliberately ambiguous and just weird.
It's such an outlier in his movies too.
It is. Well, I think he made it before Prisoners, even though it came out after Prisoners. So that, like, if that were the case, it actually makes more sense and feels less like an outlier. That actually feels more like, okay, I'm slowly making the transition to English speaking films, but I want to do something that's so me. And then Prisoners comes out and really feels more like a commercial attempt to attract audiences.
But do you really think Enemy is in line with his French Canadian work? Because I don't think it does.
Visually and tonally, it kind of does. It just has a narrative ambiguity to it. Like it's more Lynchian by comparison. But I
which
do
is not his 3 previous movies.
No, but I think it gives off an emotional vibe that feels kind of similar to me. Like there's still a similar bleakness to it, even if it's not about bleak things. I guess that's maybe the way I would compare it. It's a challenging film, certainly for him. Trying to challenge a different form of storytelling. But I think the movie is very effective. I think it's a very cool movie.
I think it's great too. No,
Yeah.
I mean I love it. I don't think it's anything like any of his other films. Like not even close. It's
still
leagues differently.
It still feels Villeneuve enough for me. I could still see it in this ranking and feel okay. That makes sense. It's a different film, but it makes sense here. It definitely feels weird coming after or being released at least after Prisoners. Like that's where it's weird for me.
See, I just don't think it's anything like his previous works either. So
Okay.
I mean, I really like it a lot, but it is such a weird outlier. I don't think it feels anything like his other works, but there is something about the ambiguity of it and Jake Gyllenhaal at the center of the film as well. That's just so engrossing. It's really captivating. Still trying to figure out what the spiders mean. It's great.
That's one of the creepiest things I've ever seen in a Denis Villeneuve film. Like this film is creepy. It's a very scary movie.
That final shot, oh my god,
it made me quiver. Oh my gosh, that's amazing. But those are my top 3 right now. Sometimes, depending on maybe where my emotional headspace is, I could swap Sicario and Arrival between number 1 and number 2, respectively. But those are usually the 2 that top my top 2. I'm curious to see what Dune Part 2 does, but I kind of wouldn't be surprised if Sicario and Arrival really hold those places for a good long time. I love those films.
Yeah, I do as well. I love Sicario, love Arrival, of course. I don't do much writing on the website, but I did.
You
do
were
a piece
compelled.
some years ago about Arrival. It's my best writing by far.
It is. I agree. I've read that too.
And the piece I did on First Man are two of my most impassioned pieces.
Well,
of
because they
writing
came from a
written.
place of passion. You weren't
Yeah.
doing it for you weren't doing it for a paycheck or anything like that.
No,
You weren't
yeah.
obligated to write about them.
Absolutely, and it was a joy to write. I mean, I
Yeah.
love that movie. I think about it all the time. I think it is
Yeah.
a sci-fi masterpiece, and is as good as anything we've seen in the 21st century thus far.
It's a very good
Obviously,
movie.
my favorite film of 2016.
Hmm.
It's an astounding achievement that is incredible, especially Amy Adams' performance. I know that
Yeah.
she gets talked about a lot in terms of, I can't believe she wasn't nominated for an Oscar.
Hmm.
And I understand that. I agree with it. I'm one of the voices that is the echo chamber of Amy Adams should have won for Arrival.
Yeah.
But I think even beyond that, just the artistry of her performance is breathtaking to me, because you watch that film for the majority of it, or maybe even all the way through,
Yeah.
and you see it from one singular perspective.
Hmm.
And then the film gives us those reveals at the end, and you realize that she was working on an entirely different wavelength than we thought that she was doing.
Yeah. It's
It
fascinating.
is as tricky of a performance as I've seen, and she pulled it off effortlessly.
I agree.
It is
I agree.
unreal.
And
what
was
she was
not
able to
even
do.
nominated. Great stuff. Great stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a great
And
performance.
I just think
I
about,
I think it's the best performance in a Denis Villeneuve film.
yeah. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
hands down.
Not even close. Not even
Yeah.
close. Yeah.
But
So
I
what-
do think Gosling comes pretty close in 2049 though.
you bring
and-
up a great point. You bring up a very good point.
And I love that movie as well. I was saddened that it didn't do all that well at the box office, but that's what makes Villeneuve just so funny to me in some ways. And I know we've talked about this on the show before too, because when it was announced he was doing Dune, I stated on this show I wanted to be a fly on the wall as to how he convinced Warner Brothers to give him the money for Dune after
Yeah.
the failure of 2049. But 2049 is just visually stunning. Gosling is amazing. I love how it subverts that original Blade Runner, which is obviously a classic all on its own.
Yeah.
But I think it rivals that first film in terms of quality too. I don't know how controversial that statement is. I know it's a
some people-
pretty beloved movie. A lot of people love 2049 now, but
Yeah.
I think it's really great. And again, it's kind of that whole it's the spectacle and scope of it all, as we talked about earlier, and the merriment to the emotional and the thematic structure of that film that I think is
Yeah.
flawless.
You know, Blade Runner 2049 is the Denis Villeneuve film that I'm not only trying to like more as time goes on, but I think I'm finally starting to. Like right now, I probably have this ranked in like my number 5 spot of his films. And really, it comes down to two things. One being Ryan Gosling's performance. I love his performance in that movie. And the thing that keeps holding me back as to not loving it as much as, let's say, you, for instance, I love what the film is doing thematically and emotionally. I guess I keep going back to what I love so much about Ridley Scott's Blade Runner from 1982. And that's every time I watch that film, I get a completely different thematic read on something. Like that movie is so different every time I watch it. Blade Runner 2049, thematically speaking, is kind of the same movie every time I try and watch it. It doesn't have the same like opacity that first Blade Runner does, but I'm trying to convince myself that it's actually not trying to. It's like that film 2049 specifically really is more of an emotional journey than it is like a thematically challenging one, I feel like. And maybe I shouldn't be as bothered by how thematically direct it is by comparison to that first Blade Runner. It's not meant to be as tricky, I guess.
I don't think it is.
And if I can learn to accept that a bit more, I think I'm going to like the movie a lot more. I mean, there are certainly
Yeah.
tricky things in it that it's certainly doing that kind of get you to question certain thematic like ideas and maybe certain character allegiances, but it's not meant to provoke the same kind of questionable response from you that the first film did. And maybe the looking at it as more of an emotional journey is probably what I need to do.
Yeah, to me, I would argue that's what's most important with Blade Runner 2049
Okay.
because it is. I feel like you're swimming against the current if you're
Yeah.
trying to look for the same ambiguity because that whole film is an obvious flip of the coin to Blade Runner.
Yeah.
And Ridley Scott was trying to invoke a massive ambiguity as to is he a replicant or not. And so there's so much to that film where you don't know what's true and what isn't. You're trying to put those pieces together as Ridley Scott is offering you one sleight of hand after another. And I say that as a great thing. I love that about that film. But this is a film that is flipping that coin. That's not something Denis can't do that same thing.
Yeah.
Because then again, he's swimming against the current. Like we find out very early on that Kay is a replicant. We know that from the beginning. We know that early on. And so it's more about him finding the humanity and where he fits in the puzzle within that world, like where he fits in there. And so it's not at all about is he this or is he that. We know what he is.
To be fair, it's sorry to cut you off. It's not really the what or like that side of the ambiguity that I'm focusing on. It's more so like when you watch a movie like 2001: A Space Odyssey, for instance, it's not just about what happens. It's about, okay, what does this mean symbolically, thematically, like that kind of stuff. You get new interpretations from that movie every single time. And I have that same reaction to Blade Runner. But with 2049, I get the exact same theme every time I try and rewatch that film. And that's what bothers me. It's not so much the narrative ambiguity. I could, give or take that. It's more so like, okay, I want to find new thematic and emotional layers to this movie every time I watch it. And I just don't. Like that's kind of the thing for me.
Well, I guess that's what I was trying to build toward.
Gotcha.
Is that by letting go of that narrative ambiguity, because it's quite obvious what he's trying to do there, that's where the true texture of that film lies. And I think there is a lot of layers and a lot of nuance to be had there, especially given Gosling's performance. And he is the king of stoicism.
Yeah.
You certainly get that in Drive and in First Man, and it's a big part of his performance in 2049, and he's just so great at it. So, like, there's moments where you read into his performance and you can interpret sadness, but maybe it's a little bit of hopelessness or vice versa. And there's certainly times where it might be a little bit more obvious, such as kind of his own tears in the rain kind of moment he gets at the end.
Yeah. Or like that scene he has with the other replicants where they have this like uprising of sorts and they literally say to him, more human than human. That's what we are. It's like I don't like that scene at all. And maybe that's giving me such a sour taste in my mouth for the rest of the movie. And that's more on me being unfair to the movie. And I'm willing to admit that. But it is very thematically direct. And I just got to learn to accept that it's not meant to be as challenging. It's a different form of challenge, I guess.
Well, I just find it challenging in the sense that I think it does a great job of reinventing a wheel that already exists. Like it's flipping the coin almost completely from what you saw in that first Blade Runner, but it's not trying to hide that. There's no ambiguity in that. But I still think that's where execution matters. I think that's where emotion matters. And all of that is there. It's incredibly well shot. The craft is out of bounds. The cinematography is astounding. It's as immersive, and the performances are great. And it has as much, if not any more, of an emotional core than that first Blade Runner, which I really like. There is a little coldness to that first Blade Runner, which is intentional because of the what if of it all. Villeneuve doesn't have that luxury, and he doesn't care to. He
No.
leans into the emotion of it, which is
Yeah.
more up his alley anyway as a filmmaker.
Yeah.
So he plays into his strengths in that regard, and he allows Gosling to just chew the freaking hell out of that character.
Mhm.
And I think he reverberates something that is just unbelievably sophisticated for a character that we know is not human from
Yeah.
the beginning.
I will say, for a film like Blade Runner 2049 that is certainly more thematically direct than its predecessor, it at least does not fall into the same trappings as something like Doctor Sleep, which spent half its time just answering your questions about The Shining, right? Which
Exactly.
I don't like that film at all for those reasons. But thankfully, 2049 does enough to preserve the ambiguities of that first film.
Even though Deckard is in this film, like, it's not a crux that leans in, like, on it as the first film does.
No,
You know,
you're right. You're right.
like, he's doing something new and different, and using that character to only amplify the themes of this one.
Yeah.
And
It's that's true. That's true.
and I know that you don't feel this way, but just to clear it up, for anyone listening that might be a little confused on it, being direct doesn't mean that it lacks nuance. It's thematic intentions are certainly different, but I would argue it's just as sophisticated.
Well, it's just as
does it
sophisticated.
in a very
Yeah.
different way.
It's a very different way. And if any problems I have with 2049 right now, I am willing to admit they're me problems and not movie problems. Because for me, when I'm looking, what I'm looking for in my sci-fi films is to feel confused. Like usually when I see a sci-fi film that's dense on ideas and things like that, I want to feel confused. And this movie doesn't confuse me in the same way. And maybe it's not. I just have to learn to accept that it's not supposed to confuse you in the same way that a movie like Ridley Scott's Blade Runner did. It's a different form of challenge.
I just want to feel whatever the film wants me to feel, like what it's aiming for.
Yeah,
That's what I want to feel.
gotcha.
Whether that's confusion, whether it's heartache, bleakness, whatever the case is. Because I haven't read Dune, but from what I know, Dune Part 2, be prepared to leave the theater not feeling great. That's
that's
and I haven't read the book, but that's the word on the street.
Well, that's what I'm hoping for in that movie, because
that's it. So, like, my point in that is to say I want to feel what the film wants me to feel, because that means it worked. And for 2049, it was, I would argue anyway, it was to feel the emotional undercurrent of the film.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think that's fair, and that's why I'm trying to come around in the film, and why I think I ultimately am as time goes on. A lot of it does come down to Ryan Gosling's performance. I do think he is great in that movie. You're right. He is so good at stoicism, and when he has to lash out, it's actually like he has one moment of catharsis in the memory scene, or the memory. What's it called? The memory bank. That place is called. And even when he lashes out, you don't really know why. The why of it is still pretty unclear. So there is emotional ambiguity as opposed to traditional sci-fi ambiguities. But I sometimes miss that. I sometimes miss that a little bit. And again, I'm willing to admit that's a me problem. That's totally a me thing.
So then there's Sicario, which was one of my favorite films of 2015. He directs the living hell out of that movie.
Oh, it's so good. It's
really
so good. It makes me curious of going back to Sicario 2 and seeing if we got something wrong, but I also don't want to. I don't want to.
Absolutely not. That film is so bad.
It's not good. It's really not
so
good.
bad.
But the Sicario, this first film this is a very, talk about thematic complexity. This is a very complex movie. It has like no allegiance to anyone, whether it be like us as Americans or the cartel. Like it's so like, it's not passive, but it refuses to take a side and actually raises a point at the end that is kind of provocative in how we actually have to end the drug war by kind of fueling it at the same time. It's like it's kind of a creepy notion. It's a bold movie. It is a bold movie.
It is a bold movie. I love its direction. I love its performances. Its desert landscapes are incredible. There's a blurriness to the whole film aesthetically that mirrors the film thematically for the reasons you're just talking about there.
Yeah.
It's just a remarkably directed movie. Absolutely adore it a lot. The performances of it, I think, are maybe a little underrated in his filmography. Because obviously
they don't
you think
stand
about-
out as much as an Amy Adams, but like they're not
or Ryan
required to as
Gosling.
much. Yeah, it's. I mean, the ensemble nature of it makes it hard to do that. Plus, there is kind of a bait and switch at the end when you realize whose movie this actually is. So it kind of it doesn't allow like a performance to really outshine the overarching message of the movie. Like the message of the movie is really what this movie's about.
Yeah, well, because I just think about Emily Blunt. I honestly, I do think this is one of her better performances since
Agreed.
2015.
Yeah.
It's really great, and I love how she's able to tap into the convictions of her character. There's this remarkable tension that is at play.
Mm-hmm.
And Benicio del Toro, I think, is absolutely terrifying.
Yeah.
He's really great at playing up the idea that this guy cannot be trusted at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Villeneuve wonderfully, I know that there was some controversy around this, but that moment where the film switches perspective, I think, is the right call.
Yeah.
Because it does enhance that idea of what this guy is capable of.
Yeah.
And that final shot is so thick. I remember watching that film. It might have been with you.
Oh yeah,
I
we
can't
saw it.
recall.
We saw
You
it
saw us
advanced
together?
screening in Louisville, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, we ran into our friend Michael Dennison there.
I thought I was going to die. Like
Yeah.
the last 20 seconds of this movie, as Kate walks away, I was on the edge of my seat. I couldn't handle it. It was so good.
This movie feels dangerous. Like
Yeah.
the movie I most compare it to, just as far as tone and the way you feel while watching it, is something like Zero Dark 30. Like you feel like you're watching,
Sure, yeah.
like you feel like you're watching something confidential. Like after seeing this, you're gonna start getting threats by the FBI or something.
Yeah.
It feels so
Yeah, there
like
was a-
like you shouldn't be watching this.
Yeah, there's a similar visceralness to this as something like Zero Dark 30 for sure.
Yeah, it's like the curtains lifting for something so classified.
Yeah, it's so tangible, and I think that complements the cinematography of the film and that tonal precision.
Oh,
that's here.
Roger Deakins, baby.
Roger Deakins. God,
Oh, the
man.
score, Johann Johansson.
Yes, Johann Johansson.
The late
brings
great.
an incredible score here.
Yeah.
It's a great movie. It's a great movie. I think you said you had this at number 1 for you.
It goes back and forth between this and Arrival, but right now I have Sicario at number 1, and I feel pretty good about keeping that at number 1. I do think this is his best movie in many ways. At least it's my personal favorite.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty clear for me my top 3 are Arrival, Blade Runner, Sicario, however you want to order those 3. But those are for sure my 3. After that, it can be a little bit debatable because I do really like all of the other films that I've seen. Prisoners, I can say confidently, is my least favorite of the 3.
Oh, thank God.
Of all those, and we haven't really talked about it all that much here, but and I like it okay. I think it's the messiest of them, unless you want to count Enemy, because there's not much of a script to Enemy.
Well, the messiness of Enemy is kind of deliberate, I feel like.
It's very deliberate for sure.
Yeah. Prisoners is just messy from a narrative nature in the wrong
script
ways.
Just isn't as put together.
Yeah, well, there's two big problems I have with Prisoners. The first one being I think by the time it reaches its conclusion, it doesn't really have much to say thematically. And I also think it's one of those examples where a film can kind of be ruined by its ending for me. Because I think for the
Yeah,
most part,
we've debated this a lot. Yeah.
yeah, like Prisoners, I actually think is quite a good movie for most of its runtime. I really like the idea of this really being this kind of obsessive journey between a grieving father and a detective who's just like stuck in this job and trying to prove his worth, really.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what makes them metaphorical prisoners of a sort. Like, I think Prisoners works better as a metaphorical thriller than it does a literal crime thriller.
Yeah.
Which is why I don't like that ending. Okay, this movie's been out for a while, so this is a spoiler. This movie tanks the second we see in the background Melissa Leo lift her gun and reveal her master plan. The second that happens, I'm out. Like, I'm out. The movie just tanked for me because this was never a whodunit to me. I never cared about who did it. And I don't think the movie was ever interested. And I just don't like that Denis felt the need to go down that way. It feels cheap. It doesn't feel necessary for the thematic crux of this movie to me.
Well, this was written by Aaron Gozakowski. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. But I do think he is the problem here. I do think he is the problem.
Yeah.
He's only written, according to this anyway, 2 other movies. Contraband
Has he written anything
in 2012.
What was it? Sorry.
Contraband in 2012.
Oh, I've heard of that. Never saw it.
And which I don't think was very good.
Uh-huh.
And then Papillion in 2017.
Oh, Papillon is, I think it's what it's called. That was a remake.
Sure.
Yeah, that's a remake
I
of a
haven't
movie
seen that
with
one.
Steve McQueen
I
and
don't
Dustin
know about that
Hoffman.
one, so.
Yeah, heard it wasn't very good either.
But it stars Charlie Hunnam, so maybe I should give it a go.
Oh, and Rami Malek's in that too, I think. Yeah.
So I do think that is the problem there. The other issue for me, and this is less of an actual fundamental problem of the movie and more so I think it might speak to why it doesn't register as deeply for me. Denis Villeneuve took this on in order to get his foot in the door in Hollywood.
Yeah.
So this is the least Denis Villeneuve film, I think, in his filmography. Weirdly, I know I talked about how Enemy is his biggest outlier, and I still very much think that is the case. But there is at least an ambition to that film and a conviction that I would tether to Villeneuve.
Yeah.
Prisoners, I do like. I think it is an effective thriller. On the whole, it is good. I think Villeneuve saves it. But I think this is the movie where his conviction is least felt.
It's kind of a director for hire job.
It's a director for hire movie.
Yeah.
And he needed this film to work in order for him to get more movies, right? Because this was his first attempt.
Yeah.
This was his first foray into Hollywood filmmaking on a $46 million budget, and it rendered $122 million.
Yeah,
So
that's
Hollywood took
pretty
notice,
promising.
was like, okay, we got something here. We got a guy we can work with. And that launched him into the guy that we know he is now. So there was a lot at stake. And I think as a result, this is the most conventional movie in his filmography.
Yeah, it is. And that doesn't have to be a bad thing. It really does come down to that script that is the problem. And when I say I don't know why Denis felt the need to conclude the movie this way, I mean, as director, he does have control if he wanted to change that ending, if he really wanted to.
Well,
but I don't think he had the conviction to, and that's fine.
No, partially because I think he wanted to play it a little safe. I think he just wanted this movie to make money.
Yeah. And
he plays it in a way that I think most people in his position would.
Yeah.
For better or worse, you can argue about the merits of that, I guess. A true artiste would never do that. Okay.
I mean, it's overall, it is a well-made movie.
It's a well-made movie. It's good. And there was a lot at stake for him. He needed this movie to make money. Otherwise, he doesn't get to make Sicario.
Yeah.
And then he doesn't get to make Arrival. And we would all be worse off if that was the case. So
I'm glad the movie exists. I just don't like it.
I don't mind those choices. I certainly understand them in context. Yeah. And on the whole, it's still a good movie. I do like it a lot. But it's my least favorite of those that I've seen of his.
Gotcha. Yeah.
As a result, for sure. thus far anyway.
It's toward the bottom for me as well. It's between this and Maelstrom are my two least favorites, and it's harder for me to rank Prisoners that low because I think the first 2/3 are kind of close to great. They're at least very good. Like it very rarely does a film's conclusion, or in this case, its twist ending, like just completely tank the experience for me. And that's really what happens for me here more than anything else.
I know we're going a little bit long here. Do you have any other thoughts on Villeneuve as we head into Dune Part 2 this weekend?
Not really. I think the only film we haven't really talked about much is Dune Part 1. But we did acknowledge that where we rank this film and where we sit with it now is kind of provisional because it was very much a Part 1. It's very clear that these Dune movies are channeling like Lawrence of Arabia in some ways. And Lawrence of Arabia was very clearly divided into two halves with a clear intermission that separated two completely different experiences. That first half of Lawrence of Arabia is a very heroic and I don't want to say conventional because it wasn't conventional for the time, but it was a very heroic and accepting kind of journey. And then the second half kind of shows how that was not a good thing.
It challenges a lot of those norms.
So Dune Part 1 right now kind of feels like yet another one of those, chosen one narratives that we've seen before. Very Luke Skywalker, very Harry Potter. It's not too different from that. But from what I hear, Part 2 is going to showcase that it wasn't really a good thing.
Well, and if you've read the book, you know where this is going.
You know where this is going. Yeah. You know that the whole point of Frank Herbert's Dune was to challenge that very Messiah kind of mentality. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
So, you're going to leave the theater maybe feeling a little deflated, but that's the whole point.
Yeah.
That's certainly the point. But I agree with you. And I have no problem with Dune Part 1, I guess, ending the way it does or functioning as a Part 1 because there's a lot of story to be told. And I would prefer that he gets carte blanche to make this into several parts if it means telling a fuller story and we don't get the David Lynch debacle.
Yeah.
Or any other, or like another example that you could always throw out there is M. Night Shyamalan's The Last Airbender, since that's top of mind. That movie fails primarily because you have so much material to sift through. That's hours and hours of the show that you have to then make
condense,
that into a 2-hour concise movie. It's just not going to work.
Yeah.
It's
All of a sudden,
not gonna work.
You're basically just making a 2-hour like montage is basically all you can do with that. And that's not a movie. It's not a movie.
Netflix has proved that even expanding that out into the length of 3 or 4 movies is still not enough.
I know.
It's just one of those things where, if you get 2 movies to tell a story because the material is so dense, I totally understand making that choice, and him getting the approval to do that is incredible. So I'm totally fine with it. Because the craft is there, the performances are there. As far as channeling the themes and setting up that whole hero's journey thing, I think that first Dune is extremely effective and compelling at doing that.
It certainly feels like a very effective prelude to the meat of this story. If I have any big qualms with that first Dune, the first one being Denis, not David Lynch's, Dune Part 1 specifically, I do think there was a better point for that film to end rather where it does. Like, I actually feel like where Dune Part 1 ends actually feels more like the first act of Part 2. I feel like I feel like there was a point before that where it should have rolled credits. But where we go feels like, this feels like we're starting another story now as opposed to ending one. So like that's really my only issue is it makes the experience feel like it just kind of stops as opposed to where it could have naturally concluded better. But that's really my only issue with it.
Yeah, I don't mind that either. I haven't seen Dune Part 2 yet as we are recording this. By the
Right.
time you're hearing it, I have. So
Yeah.
we're in a weird little space here.
Time is a
because-
weird thing. This is like Christopher Nolan directing our podcast.
Because as of right now, as we're recording, I haven't seen part 2, so I don't know where it starts and how it evolves the story from there.
Yeah.
You know, because I might agree with you depending on what happens.
Yeah.
However, I do think that while the coda of part 1 does feel a little untethered from everything that came before,
Yeah.
it does end in a space where I still think there's some closure in the sense that Paul's like, okay, I defeated this guy. We're with these guys now.
Yeah.
And so it still feels like a turning of the page.
Okay.
We're here. We're with these guys now.
Yeah.
We're no longer House Atreides. We're no longer on the run. We're with this group
Yeah.
now.
And maybe it's more of an execution thing as opposed to a narrative thing. And like the coda like nature of it. I'm still wrestling with that. And maybe part 2
Yeah.
will help solidify that, like the way that feels in comparison to the overarching story that it's all going to connect to.
For sure.
So we'll see.
Okay. We'll see. At any rate, I think we'll go ahead and wind down here. I know we've gone a little long here, so I do appreciate everyone sticking with us.
Lots to talk about.
Lots to talk about with Denis. Very much looking forward to Dune Part 2, as I'm sure you all are as well.
Mm-hmm.
We'll, of course, have a review for that in the coming week or so. I guess as we wind down here, one, again, be sure to subscribe to either Patreon, YouTube membership, or Apple Podcast and be on the lookout for our bonus content episodes. We'll have that coming out. Reviews this week. We will have a review for Drive Away Dolls that should be available right now.
Yep.
So you can be on the lookout for that. We'll also have a review for How to Have Sex.
Yeah.
The indie film. We were able to see that. And hopefully, fingers crossed, we will get to The Promised Land and The Teacher's Lounge.
Yeah.
Which we were supposed to do 2 weeks ago.
We've seen them. We're ready to talk about them. Just trying to find the time for it.
Exactly. So we'll hopefully get to those as well.
Yeah.
Be sure to be on the lookout for Women in Session this week as well. They'll have a new episode. Last week's show was insane. It was a 5-person panel. It was really incredible. So go and
good
check
for them.
that out.
Good for them. It's great
They'll
stuff.
have
Great
a
stuff.
new, and we'll have some Chasing the Gold coming soon as well because the pesky Oscars are coming up soon.
Those old things.
So you can be on the lookout for that. Be sure to follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Be sure to email us if you want to get a hold of us on long form, InSessionFilm@gmail.com. If you're watching us on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, like the video, leave a comment, all that fun stuff. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, rate and review us on those platforms as well. It really helps us out. And I think that's it. Do you have any final thoughts, Brendan, before we get out of here?
Oh, just JD, make sure you go to the bathroom before Dune Part 2. I'm just realizing it's almost 3 hours long.
Of course.
For some reason, I did not. I knew it was long, but I didn't know it was that long. Okay, I got to prepare myself for this one when I see it.
I know between Avatar and then Oppenheimer and Killers of the Flower Moon, we're just getting a lot of 3-hour movies.
Oh, it's
years.
Yeah, and honestly, it's doable for me to sit through all those movies in the theater. It's not the problem. It's just I got to change my diet a little bit leading up to it.
For sure. Fair enough. No, I understand that. So,
yeah.
I'm curious to hear what you all think of Dune Part 2. Let us know what you think of Denis Villeneuve. Hope you all enjoyed the conversation. With that, thanks for listening and watching, everybody. We'll see you next time on the InSession Film Podcast. Oh, man. Tom Cruise, can you believe it?
I'm just glad we didn't say Denis Villeneuve on this show.